Good afternoon. You're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Jess De Los Santos. It's almost Christmas. We can smell it, we can taste it. But first, it's business as usual. Let's take a look at how the local bourse closed today, Friday. Okay, no Christmas love here from investors as the main index caps off Christmas Eve with a 0.9% fall to 7,181. The benchmark ends the week in the red, shedding 1.6%. That's over a 5-day period. Looking at our leaders and laggards here, hotel operator Bloomberg is a day's outperformer, rising 3 and 1/10%. Pure Gold also in the green here, up by 2 and 7/10%. On the flip side, though, you have Aboitiz Equity Ventures, a day's worst performer. That's even as its banking unit, Union Bank, confirmed its acquisition of Citi's Philippine unit. Again, Aboitiz Equity Ventures is down 2 and 7/10%. But now, off to the day's big corporate story still. We already reported this earlier. You have the Poe family through Century Pacific Food and Shakey's Pizza. They are in a shopping spree mode here as they acquire Ligo Sardines and Potato Corner, respectively. Now, Andre Soriano of AP Securities saying this is going to be a good move for the Poe family, considering that Potato Corner is going to be a significant addition to Shakey's revenue. Ligo, on the other hand, eliminates competition for Century Foods. Now, just to give you, again, the details here first for Century Pacific Food, they snapped up Ligo Sardines, so that includes the purchase of assets and intellectual property rights for Ligo products. According to Christopher Poe, chairman of Century Pacific Food, Ligo will be highly synergistic with Century's marine products portfolio, and nowhere though yet on the acquisition amount. On the other hand, regarding Shakey's, they are again also on buying mode as it acquires Potato Corner. The deal is going to cover assets and intellectual property as well. Purchase also includes company-owned stores. Shakey's will also now be the brand owner and franchisor both domestically and internationally. Again, no details yet on the terms of the deal. As you can see right here, shares of Shakey's is represented by the orange line, jumped as much as 17.3% before closing 8.9% higher, ending the session at 10 pesos and 40 centavos a piece, while Century Pacific, as you can see represented by the white line here, rose as much as 4.6% before ending the session with a 1.9% gain at 26 pesos and 90 centavos a share. Now, here are more updates on the extent of the devastation brought by Odette. Some residents in Siargao Island are left with no choice but to spend Christmas in makeshift shelters or evacuation centers as their homes have been wiped out by the typhoon. Here's the full report.
To return to Siargao despite the devastation caused by Typhoon Odette. Among them is Nanay Mila, a Del Carmen resident who built a shack by the roadside with her kids and grandkids. This is where they will spend the holidays.
Dito kami titira. Kasi wala kaming bahay. Dito lang kami, ma'am. Sa bahay namin, basta magkasama kami. Ang mga anak, mga apo. Dito lang, bisa maliit lang anak mo, payag. Basta magkasama kami lahat.
This is Siargao days after Odette's onslaught. No lights except from passing vehicles and those with generator sets. The once vibrant island is almost unrecognizable now, with hundreds of coconut trees gone. Residents say Odette is the worst typhoon to hit the island since 1984. With homes wiped out, some use the fallen trees to build temporary shelters. It's that or staying in jam-packed evacuation centers.
Hindi naman pwede po na sa evacuation magsiksikan po kasi doon napakaraming tao po. Kaya gagawa talaga tayo ng paraan.
Actress Nadine Lustre returned to Siargao to donate solar panels and relief goods.
The people here in Malinao can use so that they could charge gadgets, their phones, lights or anything that would need power. Phones will be useful to use as lights.
Meanwhile, Surigao del Norte Representative Bingo Matugas refuted allegations that the LGU is blocking donations for victims.
Walang po naghaharang ng relief goods. Kahit sinong private group na magtumulong, wala kaming it's a matter of recording saka organization yung malagay yung system saka organization para hindi magulo, lahat makatanggap.
Besides electricity, the LGU is also prioritizing the restoration of access to potable water. This is after the reported outbreak of diarrhea in the area. For now, residents are just trying to get by, holding on to hope that they can once again get back on their feet come 2022. Reporting for News 5, Jen Calimon, We Are One News.
Another problem that's being experienced by the victims of the typhoon is the overpricing of basic goods despite the imposition of a price freeze. Government agencies say they're now going after profiteers who are taking advantage of scarce resources. Mobile journalist Pamela Vasquez has the rest of the story.
A week after Typhoon Odette devastated several regions in Visayas and Mindanao, food, water, and fuel supply remain scarce. And now there are reports people are taking advantage by selling water and fuel for double or even triple regular price. Siargao tourist guide Mark Anthony Lim says gasoline is being sold from 100 to 150 pesos per bottle at this point.
Napabili ako ng gas na 120 sa bote. Pero wala ka lang magagawa kasi wala ka ng gas.
Siargao is one of the areas that bore the brunt of Odette, with officials estimating up to 90% of the population were impacted. Lim says relief goods have come in, but it's still not enough.
Kung halimbawa, bibili ka ng gas, hindi ka bibigyan. Kahit tubig man lang o pagkain na relief goods, okay na.
On Facebook, dozens of people are complaining about overpriced basic necessities. Like this photo of 500 milliliter water bottles being sold for 60 pesos. Normally, it's just 10 to 15 pesos a piece. In other typhoon-stricken areas like Cebu, a gallon of mineral water is being sold for as much as 130 pesos. This is despite the price freeze imposed on basic necessities after President Duterte placed regions 4B, 6, 7, 8, 10, and 13 under a state of calamity. The Department of Trade and Industry has already instructed its consumer protection groups and regional offices to go after profiteers.
We are advising them, submitingin yung government sa inyo. So let's not take advantage of the situation kasi mahirap na nga, papahirapin pa.
The Energy Department has also issued a warning.
We are calling the attention of retail outlets that are overpricing, that they are violating Section 52 of the Consumer Act. Merong administrative and criminal penalties yan.
DTI is urging the public to report incidents of overpricing through its main Facebook page, DTI Philippines, or consumer care at dti.gov.ph. Mobile journalist Pamela Vasquez, We Are One News.
Urban planner and landscape architect Paulo Alcazaren says it could take 3 to 4 years for provinces affected by Typhoon Odette to fully recover. Speaking on One News' The Chiefs, Alcazaren explains it could take this long as the country is still reeling from the effects of the pandemic. Alcazaren also notes that some of the areas battered by Odette, like Siargao and Palawan, are tourism-based, which means they don't have any other resources that could quickly boost their recovery. The expert says these areas must take lessons from past calamities and plan and rebuild better structures through proper construction, engineering, and design. Meanwhile, the Alagang Kapatid Foundation admits that it's still experiencing major difficulties in transporting relief goods from Metro Manila to areas in Mindanao affected by Odette. On One News' The Big Story, Executive Director Menchi Silvestre says this is because operations in ports remain suspended due to damage caused by the typhoon. Silvestre says this is the reason why they prefer cash donations over in-kind donations so they can purchase goods in areas near affected communities. The MVP group of companies has also sent out a team of doctors from the Makati Medical Center to Siargao to check on residents suffering from diarrhea following Odette's onslaught. Now, death toll from Typhoon Odette has climbed to 326, according to the official data from the NDRRMC. 58 persons are still missing, while more than 600 were injured. Around 870,000 families, or more than 3 million individuals, were affected by the typhoon's onslaught. Some 300,000 people are still staying in evacuation centers across affected regions. Meanwhile, damage to agriculture caused by Odette has reached 3.5 billion pesos. That's as of yesterday. The Agriculture Department reports that the typhoon affected at least 44,000 farmers and fishers, as well as more than 66,000 hectares of agricultural areas. The volume of production loss reached almost 92,000 metric tons. The DA says it has some 2.6 billion pesos worth of readily available assistance to farmers and fishers affected by Odette. The Budget Department has also released an initial 1 billion pesos to assist affected LGUs. Now, moving over to some COVID-19 related headlines, we have the Philippines inching up 3 places from the bottom of the Bloomberg Resiliency ranking. The country placed 50th out of 53 countries. That's after 3 months at the bottom of the list. Bloomberg says this is because of the easing of restrictions in the Philippines and improvement of its vaccination rates. Bloomberg also notes that the country's positive test rates are falling, suggesting that undetected infection is finally coming under control. Replacing the Philippines at the bottom of the ranking is Vietnam. Bloomberg says this is due to a Delta-driven outbreak, which has caused deaths to spike and clouded Vietnam's economic outlook. South Africa and Indonesia, meanwhile, placed 52nd and 51st in the ranking. Now, even as the Omicron variant alters consumer routines, COVID-19 shock to the system has brought much-needed change. Bloomberg's Matt Townsend explains how the virus actually helped save the global retail industry. Let's take a listen.
You know, they were dipping their toes in it. They were trying to invest. They were trying to figure things out. But I mean, if you think about the, basically big chains, companies with scale, Walmart, Target, Best Buy, those kinds of chains, the department store sector, slower to adapt. And then, on down the line, weaker sort of players in the industry, names like Gap, slower to adapt before the pandemic.
Yeah, slower to adapt is something you said a couple of times and is a common theme here. E-commerce is not exactly new. Amazon was taking market share for years now. What is the biggest obstacle to retailers adapting to making critical investments in technology? Is it money? Is it time? Is it mindset?
It's a little bit of all three. The big thing the pandemic did was, it really got consumers to change to where retail thought things were going. So they've always, for basically the past decade, have been saying, the way that we survive as legacy retailers is this thing called omnichannel, which is kind of this buzzy word that they talk about, which basically just simply means you intertwine the store and e-commerce in some way. And they've been trying to figure out how to do that. And what we saw during the pandemic is, yes, before the pandemic, people shopped online. There were people doing things like online grocery. There were people picking up online orders in stores, shopping with their phones in stores. But all that accelerated. Basically, everyone, for the most part, had to change their shopping behavior. So all these people, different generations, different demographics adopt a new behavior. And that looks like the catalyst that a lot of retailers need to really just kind of go after this vision of omnichannel and really try things and be innovative and not be worried about, maybe investing in something that doesn't work because they had to, because consumers got to that point and now retailers have to meet them.
Right.
And we saw that, and we've seen that in a lot of different ways during the pandemic around the world, all this experimentation going on. So a lot of people we talked to for the story basically said, look, a lot of retailers, because of this, are going to come out of COVID in a stronger position, or at least a better sense of like where they need to go as a business.
Okay, they have a little more clarity. They can kind of see a path. What you mentioned in your story was really interesting, which is China has become one of the world's most sophisticated retail markets, and in terms of innovating and meeting the consumer where they are. So tell us some of the creative ways that stores there use e-commerce that you see coming down the pike here in the U.S.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest examples is this term live streaming, which basically, if you think about it, it's like a home shopping network or a QVC, but it's online. And this has been happening in China for a while, but what happened in the pandemic is even more companies and more stores, just think about like a corner, grocery store or corner boutique doing live streaming, which is basically selling things live on the internet, almost like a show. And it's become a very big deal in China. It creates a lot of connection with consumers in the store, especially local stores, and they get to know the shop owners, people who work there. And now we're seeing that filter out to other parts of the world, including the US. The big chains aren't doing this as much yet, but we've seen a lot of adoption with smaller companies, boutiques, things like that. Companies that maybe had their own website before the pandemic, and now they're doing these live streaming events, several times a week, selling a lot of goods that way, connecting with their customers. And, a lot of people we talked to in the industry think that that's sort of the future of how stores and e-commerce will go. It's a connection both online in a real way, meaningful way, and a connection to the store.
Right.
And that's potentially where the next sort of breakthroughs will come for the retail industry, is to really create more of a connection to like your local store, the people who work there, becoming more familiar with you and you're more familiar with them, and sort of creating.
And before we end our broadcast today, many of our kababayans in the provinces hit by Typhoon Odette have no food and no water. They have lost their homes and some have lost loved ones. Let's make them feel the spirit of Filipino bayanihan. You may send your donations through the following channels now being flashed on your screens. Let's make them feel that through this pandemic, through this devastation, tuloy pa rin ang Pasko. Thank you for joining us today, December 24, 2021. Catch Businessworld Live again Monday next week at 9:30 a.m. for the market open and 3:15 p.m. for the market close. I'm Jess De Los Santos. We are One News. Mask on, wash hands, and stay safe. Philippines, have a Merry Christmas.